Well, the Albanese government's Jobs and Skills Summit will be held next week, Thursday and Friday, September 1 and 2, at Parliament House in Canberra. It has a bit of a Hans Christian Andersen look about it, because the issues paper says the summit will cover 5 broad themes: maintaining full employment and growing productivity, boosting job security and wages, lifting participation and reducing barriers to employment, delivering a high-quality labour force through skills, training and migration, and maximising opportunities in the industries of the future. Well, so far there's no evidence of growing productivity, and so far the worker will tell you where his wages sit, with inflation far outstripping any wage growth, and reducing barriers to employment. I thought government made a fair fist of that themselves during coronavirus, shutting the economy down. Delivering a high-quality labour force. Well, if there's a bias in favour of a university education and against trade training, then there will certainly be a shortage of skill. Migration? I'll look at that in a moment. But already we have the Jobs Minister, Brendan O'Connor, saying the country needed to better recognise the existing skills and qualifications of migrants who come to Australia, which could include, quote, bridging training, instead of forcing them to study again for years. Now, only a week ago, the government said it was considering increasing the annual migration cap from its current rate of 160,000, and that will be central, we're told, to the Skills Summit, and apparently will be announced in the October budget. Well, in that excellent anthology of essays edited by the young man who stood in for me on this program last week, Jake Thrupp, there it is on your screen, Professor Judith Sloan, with wide experience in these fields of labour studies, wrote a telling essay, Why Politicians Have It All Wrong. And Professor Judith Sloan joins me. Judith, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. But Judith, if we're talking about growing productivity and reducing the barriers to employment, why do you think the nation's peak oil and gas body, the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association, and the owner of our largest coal-fired power plant, Woodside Energy, are not invited?
Well, I think that's right, Alan, but also there are some other, you think you might invite someone, say, from the recruitment industry, because they tend to be close to the ground in terms of what's actually going on, where it's difficult to recruit and the like, but they didn't get a Guernsey either. But look, you and I know, Alan, this is political theatre. When Albanese announced the summit, when he was the leader of the opposition, he was struggling to get attention. And this summit was supposed to be about unemployment and underemployment. And of course, he got to this point. It was actually clear at the time, but now you can't have it about unemployment because, unemployment is 3.4%. So I think actually cluttering the agenda, as you read out the wide agenda that they're proposing, is a way of ensuring that we all get a bit confused about it. And whatever comes out of it, the government wants to come out of it at this point.
Yes, that's right. The release at the end has most probably already been written. I want to get onto migration in a moment, but before we do, could I just have a quick comment from you? What political noose do you think Bowen and co are putting around their necks by saying we'll get to 82% renewables by 2030?
Well, I write for the Australian, but I also write for the Spectator. So if anyone wants to read that, that's where you see Bad Judith in my in my best rhetorical flourishes. But I made the point a few weeks ago that the two most dangerous people in the Albanese government are Bowen and Burke, the two Bs. So watch that space. And I think Bowen, partly because he doesn't realise that he's being sold a whole lot of rubbish, is going along with it. And Burke, of course, they have to pay off the union masters, so he's going along with that. Those are both, I think they are both dangerous politicians for, the national interest.
Absolutely.
Leave aside the politics.
Good point.
Of it.
In that essay you wrote in Australia Tomorrow, which Jake edited, Big Australia, you said why politicians have it all wrong, and governments as now talking about high migrant intakes, businesses can't fill jobs, significant skill shortages and so on, the decline in international student enrolments. Just as simple the question, therefore, Judith, is migration the answer?
Well, it's definitely no silver bullet. And I try and make this simple point always, that of course more migrants means a bigger economy, but a bigger economy doesn't mean higher living standards, higher per capita income. So everyone has to keep thinking per capita, right? So what happens is that, yes, you can bring in more migrants, and there are definitely winners in that. I think, for example, some of the employer groups, they're going to be there at the summit with their ears pinned back saying more migrants, more migrants. The property industry, for example, they like more migrants. But if we look at the economic research, it's the per capita impact, which is so disappointing. And they won't be talking about that at the summit. Can I also make the point, which I did cover in that, yes, I agree, splendid volume that Jake put together, and what a great thing he did, really, because I didn't know him from Adam when he asked me, but I still said yes. And, you know, all the authors, pretty busy people. But survey after survey after survey shows you that the population at large does not want rapidly increasing migrant intakes. They're prepared to accept some migration. They are prepared to accept that migration has been an important part of the Australian story, but they do not want rapid migrant intakes, right? And it's interesting that there were some figures just released in the 9 papers just today, which showed exactly the same.
Right.
That people don't want more migration.
I just want to come back to the point to our viewers here that Judith's made a very valid point. It's this per capita income. Now, if you take the national economy as a cake, and then you say, righto, we're going to have 20 million people eating the cake, well, you know what slice you'll get. If you then bring in another 5 million and you don't grow the cake, the 25 million are going to have a smaller slice of the cake. That's the point that Judith Sloan is making. Unless you improve productivity, and that's grow the economy, you can't accommodate these people. But you also make a very valid point in that essay, and you say, look, this is a numbers game. Businesses don't really care about the skill profile of the newly arrived migrants. What they want are more customers to buy or rent properties, to open bank accounts, to take out loans, to buy goods and services offered by business who'll be really, as you say, into the government down here at this skills summit. And they rely on migrant intake to achieve economic growth for them. But it may not be economic growth for us. That's your point, isn't it?
Well, and that's my point. And the thing is, they will pay lip service to the idea, oh, yes, we're really interested in skill migration. But they really are not. And then if you look at the list of supposedly skilled occupations that are in short supply, they include things like childcare workers and aged care nurses and the like. Now, I'm not saying they're not important jobs, but I mean, are they seriously skilled jobs? You know, I mean, a lot of those jobs you can do, an Australian can do, by taking a 6-week TAFE course and learning on the job. So I think that is it. It's one of these things, Alan. It's the importance of language. You know, they use this language of, oh, yes, well, we're only interested in skilled migration. Yes. So everyone thinks, oh,
to placate people. But I mean, you make this point about population growth. We have amongst the highest population growth in developed economies, 1.3 to 1.5% a year growth of population. The UK, Judith cites this in this essay, 0.5%. The US 0.7, Canada 0.8, France 0.34, Spain 0.65. We're talking about 1.5%. Denmark 0.44%, all through immigration. So why is none of this ever debated? I mean, our current population is 25.7 million, but according to the latest intergenerational report, in 40 years' time, it'll be up to 40 million. I mean, how the hell do we manage all of this when you talk about schools and infrastructure and roads and, of course, social cohesion?
But, you know, here's the point. You also will see on page 1, 2 or 3 of newspapers story after story of what is essentially a crisis in rental accommodation, right?
That's it.
People cannot get affordable, adequate rental accommodation. Rents are going up dramatically. There's a huge shortage of rental accommodation, and it's not just in the big cities, it's in other places too. So for the life of me, I don't understand. So some of the business groups are saying, no, we don't like 160,000, 200,000 sounds better. How are those people going to be accommodated in the context of what really is a crisis of rental accommodation?
Absolutely.
So, it's a very multifactorial story, and I think that, it's oversimplified. And I think the government, I'm very surprised that the government is pushing this, because in many ways we have a good opportunity to basically force employers to train the locals. We're letting employers off the leash by allowing them to bring in the migrants and instead of training locals. And I think that's a great pity.
See, in coronavirus, we were told that the experts had things to say. Now, I'm not piddling in your pocket. You're widely experienced academically and in terms of your research, and you've written papers and all the rest of it. Does anyone in government read what you have written, or indeed ask your views on this?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, Alan, because I think not so much this government, but the previous government, I was in touch with a lot of the decision makers. And I think they're kind of accepted in theory. But, don't forget that what I call the big Australian lobby, they're a strong group.
Powerful.
They're a powerful group.
That's right.
And I think, they tend...
Just repeating.
I think they get the ears of all sides of politics.
That's right. They're down there. But the flip side will never be mentioned. So in other words, bring them all in, another 200,000. So they're competing for the same limited housing stock. House prices go up. They're competing for the same limited rental stock, as Judith said. Rent prices go up. Then there's the urban congestion. Have a look at the roads as it is. Then there's the pressure on infrastructure like schools and health services, and the social cohesion that I mentioned. How on earth are those things going to be addressed and overcome by just saying it's migration, migration, migration?
That's why I was quite surprised that the Treasurer of New South Wales, Matt Kean, of whom I'm not a great fan, of course, was pushing this.
Yep.
And he was actually, I guess in a way he was honest. He said, oh, yes, I want more skilled migrants for New South Wales, but he wants an unskilled visa category too. I'm thinking, wow. But, he actually, not that he kind of seems to realise it, is sitting at the desk of an organisation, because the funny thing is that the states are the ones who, in many ways, bear the costs of high rates of migration, much more so than the federal government, right? The federal government gets the additional tax revenue and the like, but the costs are often, and they're actually even borne by local government, right?
Yes.
And there's Matt Kean telling us we have to increase both skilled and unskilled.
Yeah, well, you make that point. You make that point in the essay that only 27% of the intake pre-COVID of 160,000 migrants were primary skilled migrants. Only 27%. We could talk all night, Judith. It's wonderful. The clarity of your thinking, your wonderful writing. Let's talk more often. And this whole question of immigration has got to be debated. You can't get a debate in this country about any of this stuff, can you now?
Well, that was really one of the points, and I think why I agreed to your young Jake, because I really think it is something that people want to debate.
Yes.
I think people want a measured and balanced migration program, which can kind of be accommodated without people kind of noticing the pressures.
Absolutely.
Well, that would be my end point.
I've got to tell you that Jake's just gone out to get a bit of needle and thread because the buttons have just bounced off his shirt. All right. We'll talk to you again, and I hope it's soon, Judith. Isn't she wonderful? She's wonderful, and she knows her stuff. Professor Judith Sloan.